The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in November, from an area code I did not recognize, and I answered it standing in my kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder, and a voice I had not heard in 18 years said 6 words that took the floor out of my week. Sergeant Prather. This is Ellis Cardinus. You do not forget the voice of a man who once read your name out loud in front of a formation. My spine did the thing it will do until I die, and I said, "Sir," and he let 1 second pass. The way he always let 1 second pass before the part that mattered. And then he asked me a question no one had ever asked me before, in a tone men use when they already know the answer and are praying they are wrong. June. Do you know where your bronze star is right now? And I laughed. A little, because the question sounded like the start of a joke. And I gave him the answer I had believed for 49 years of being a careful woman with careful hands. In my footlocker, sir. Where it has always been. It was the first time I ever lied to that man. And I did not know I was lying, which I have since learned is the most expensive kind of lie there is, because you pay for it retroactively, with interest, all at once. He was quiet for a moment. Standing in my kitchen, hundreds of miles from wherever he was, I heard a sound behind him I could not place yet. A low murmur. Tables, voices. The sound of a room where things are bought and sold. Then he said, "I need you to sit down, Sergeant." And I did not sit down, because sitting down is what you do when the news is about a person, and I could not yet imagine the kind of news that is about a thing. To understand what my bronze star was doing in Ohio, you have to go back to a piece of paper my father put on a kitchen table in 2001, and the piece of paper I put on top of it. My name is June Prather. I am 49 years old, and I spent 22 years in the United States Army as a military police officer. And I want to tell you what that actually is, because the movies get it wrong in both directions. It is not just gate duty and it is not just combat patrol, although I did both, in Germany and Korea and twice in Iraq. At the center of my trade, under everything else, is one discipline, and it has a name that civilians have started hearing on courtroom shows. Chain of custody. Every item logged. Every transfer signed. Every hand that touches a thing accounted for. From the moment it matters until the moment a judge says it can rest. I was good at it. Good enough that when I retired, the county sheriff back home hired me to run his evidence room. And that is what I do now. I am the keeper of other people's proof. Pistols and pills and bloodied shirts. Everyone tagged. Everyone signed for. On shelves I can walk in the dark. You can hold a thing and still not own it. My entire career, military and civilian, is built on knowing that difference. Remember that sentence. My father never learned it, and I forgot it exactly once, and between his ignorance and my one lapse, this whole story happened. My father is Gordon Prather. He is 76 years old, and for 34 years he worked at the Landis fabrication plant on the east side of our county, first as a tool and die man, then as a floor supervisor, and if you do not know what tool and die is, it is the trade of making the exact steel shapes that make every other shape possible, and it is precise, proud, unforgiving work, and he was known for it 3 counties over. My father can look at a part and tell you its tolerances by eye. He can also look at almost anything else and tell you its price, because that was the other half of his religion. Everything at Landis had a price sheet. Materials, labor, scrap, overtime, everything on the floor had a number attached. And a man who lives 34 years inside a price sheet comes home wearing it. He priced our Christmases. He priced the neighbors' cars. He priced my wedding. Later, out loud, at the reception. It was never cruelty exactly. It was fluency. Pricing was the only language he was ever taught to say the word love in. And I need you to hold on to that, because I am going to spend most of this story angry at him, and I do not want you getting there before I did. In 2001, I was 18, and my father did the single most generous thing he knew how to do. He came home on a Friday with a sheet of paper and set it on the kitchen table in front of me and smoothed it flat with both hands, the way he handled drawings at the plant. It was an apprenticeship application. Landis fabrication. Machinist track. 4 years. And his signature was already on the sponsor line. And in his world, that paper was a throne. Sons waited years for it. He had gotten it for a daughter. Over I do not want to know how many jokes in the break room. And he stood there with his hand flat on it and said, "You start in September." Not an offer. A verdict. The kindest one he had. And I looked at that paper. And I went to my room. And I came back with a different paper. And I set mine on top of his. And smoothed it flat the same way. Both hands. Because I am his daughter whether either of us likes it. Mine said United States Army. I had signed it 2 days earlier. My father looked at the two papers stacked on that table for a long time, and then he took his hands back, and he said the sentence that would run my family for the next 25 years. Well, it'll be a little phase. I want to show you what a little phase looks like when it is doing 22 years of work, because that is the part nobody films. A little phase graduated military police school and made corporal in Korea. A little phase led a gate section in Germany. A little phase deployed to Iraq in 2006 with a route security company and came home in 2007 with a medal I will let another man describe to you later, because I have never once described it myself. And back home, at every table, the phase stayed little. At my cousin Renata's wedding in 2008, my father introduced me to the groom's family as our June. She's playing soldier out in the desert, and laughed his easy laugh, and the table laughed with it. At Christmas, the year I made Sergeant First Class, which for an enlisted military police soldier is a rank you bleed for, he asked me across the ham whether I was ever going to get a real job, or whether the costume came with dental. And at my mother's funeral in 2019, standing at the receiving line in my dress blues because my mother had asked me once to wear them where she could see them, and I never had, my father looked me up and down and said, quietly so only I could hear it, "You couldn't wear a dress today of all days." That one I do not have a joke for. That one I just carry. But I owe you the other side of the ledger. Because I keep ledgers. It is my trade. In 2009, halfway through my second Iraq tour, the Landis plant closed. 63 years of steel and it went out over a 9-week wind down. And my father, 59 years old, employee number 11, walked out of that building with a box and a handshake and a pension that had been restructured twice. I was 7,000 miles away. I found out in an email from my mother. And that same week, a letter reached me at Camp Taji, the only letter my father wrote me in 22 years of service. 1 page of legal pad in block handwriting with the pen pressed hard enough to read from the back. And it did not mention the plant. Not one word. It said the weather. It said the truck was running fine. And at the bottom, above his name, it said, "Be safe. Work with your gloves on." That was all. Every trade he had, folded into one sentence. I read it maybe 200 times that deployment, and when I got home I did with it what an evidence woman does with the thing that matters most. I sleeved it. Acid-free plastic, flat, protected, and I laid it in the presentation case with the medals, right on top, so that whichever version of my father history ended up keeping, I had the exhibit that argued for him. The letter lived with the medals. Remember where the letter lived. Now, the footlocker, and my one lapse. And I will give it to you straight because this story does not work if you think I was only a victim in it. When my marriage ended in 2017, I moved into 600 square feet over a dry cleaner. And my mother, who was the true evidence custodian of our family, took my footlocker into her cedar closet without being asked, the way she had taken and kept every report card and every boot camp letter. When she died, the closet got emptied, and the footlocker went to the one storage space left in the family, my father's garage. And I stood in that garage in 2019 with the handle in my hand, and my father said, "Leave it, June. It's not in the way." And I left it. Temporary, I told myself. And here is the confession, the one this whole story turns on. I am a woman who logs the location of a stranger's pocket knife 3 ways before lunch. And I stored the proof of my own life in an unlabeled steel box, in another man's building, for 4 years, with no tag, no inventory, no receipt, because he was my father, and a daughter wants to believe the chain of custody is a thing families just have. An evidence tech knows better. A daughter wanted the chain unbroken. Those 2 women live in me all the time, And in August of this year, one of them went away for 6 weeks to a certification course in evidence management, which is the kind of irony that would be too much in a movie. And while she was gone, the other one's father decided to clean his garage. I need to tell you about the Miller Road mile-long yard sale, because you cannot understand my father's August without it, and I will keep the sarcasm to one paragraph, which is all it has ever deserved. Every third Saturday of August, our county drags its garages out onto its lawns and sells itself to itself. Card tables for 1.5 miles. Waffle irons with other families' weddings still on them. Men who will not speak at funerals standing 4 hours in the sun to defend a 50-cent price on a socket set. My father has held the same corner of Miller Road for 19 years, and he runs it like a shift at Landis. Inventory on a yellow legal pad, prices written in the block hand of a man who has never once doubted a number he wrote. People come to his table because his prices are fair and his lines are straight. That Saturday, while I was 2 states away learning the newest federal standards for storing other people's evidence, my father sold $340 worth of our family to strangers. And he was proud of it, and I want to be exact here, because exactness is what I have instead of peace. $340. And one line item, 4th from the bottom, in his own handwriting. I got home the 2nd week of September. He picked me up from the airport, which he always does, because showing up is one of the languages he does speak, and on the drive he was talkative, for him, which means 11 sentences in 40 minutes. And most of them were about the garage. Cleaned the whole thing, June. You can see the floor. Should have done it years ago. And at the house he walked me out there like a foreman walking a client up us through a finished job. And he was right. You could see the floor. The workbench was squared away. The paint cans were gone. And on the bench, flat, corners parallel to the bench edges because his hands do not know another way, lay the yellow legal pad. He tapped it once, proud. 340, he said. Best year since your mother. I picked up the pad the way I pick up everything, which is to read it, because my whole life is manifests, and his columns were clean. Item and price. Item and price. Box fans $5. Extension cords $2. Weber grill $25. And 4th from the bottom. My eyes did the thing eyes do where they read a line twice before letting it through to the rest of you. In my father's block handwriting, pressed hard, the way he pressed the pen in the only letter he ever sent me. Misc military, $5. Here is what I did not do, and I want it on the record, because the next 10 weeks depend on it. I did not gasp. I did not run for the footlocker. I stood in a swept garage holding a legal pad, and I heard my own voice come out level, the voice I use at the evidence counter, and it said, Dad, what was the military box? And my father, wiping his hands on a rag with the satisfaction of a man whose floor is finally visible, said, that old junk box of yours. Webbing and straps in some cases, whatever it was. Took up half a shelf. Some picker fella bought it first thing, didn't even haggle. And I said, which cases? And he shrugged, the shrug of 34 years of moving materials on and off a floor, and said, June. It was a box of your army stuff. I didn't inventory it. It'll turn up if you're missing something. Half that shelf got shuffled around. I want to be very careful now, because this is the part of the story where I stopped being an evidence technician for 10 weeks. And it cost me, and I have thought about it every day since. I went to the footlocker. It was there, against the wall, and my chest let go of something. I opened it, and it was not empty. And my chest let go of more. Uniforms folded. Boots. My beret in its bag. The framed flag certificate from my retirement. And I did what a tired, jet-lagged, relieved daughter does instead of what a trained custodian does. I looked at 80% and inferred 100. I did not inventory. I did not go item by item down to the bottom the way I would for a stranger's property, because it was 9 at night. And because the case with the medals had always lived in that locker, under the uniforms. And surely it had just been shuffled, his word, shuffled, to a different shelf, a different box, and it would turn up. For 10 weeks, every time something in me raised its hand, I told it what he told me. It'll turn up. My father had taught me the price of things. It turns out he had also taught me his favorite anesthetic, which is the sentence you say instead of looking. I run an evidence room. Chain of custody is my religion. And I let the most important property in my life sit unverified for 70 days, because verifying it meant finding out something about my father I did not want on the record. An evidence tech knows better. A daughter wanted the chain unbroken. I have already told you those 2 women live in me. For 10 weeks, the daughter locked the tech out of the building. While I was busy not looking, my metals were traveling, and I can tell you their route now the way I can tell you any exhibit's route, because eventually there were receipts, and I have read them all more times than is healthy. The picker who bought the box first thing that Saturday was a man who does estates and flea markets across 3 counties, and to his credit, he knew within a day that he was holding something over his weight class. A presentation case does not look like webbing. Sold the cases and contents that same week, for $60, to a militaria dealer he flips to regularly, a man with a shop near Columbus and a table at the big autumn collector's show. And the dealer did what dealers do. He researched. He photographed. He typed a listing card. And in the second week of November, on a folding table in a convention hall in Ohio, between somebody's grandfather's helmet and a rack of patches, my Bronze Star with Valor device, my Purple Heart, and the ribbons and boards of 22 years lay under glass with a card that said, named Bronze Star Group, Female Military Police, Iraq, $450. Named. That is the trade's word for it, and I want you to sit with the trade's word, because it is the whole hinge of this story. Named. Because in this country, when they give you a medal that cost what mine cost, a machine at an arsenal cuts your name into the back of it. Permanent, in capital letters, before it ever touches your hand. The army had put my name where my father never looked. Chain of custody, cut into brass. My whole trade, it turns out, engraved on the one exhibit I failed to protect. And on the second afternoon of that show, a retired brigadier general named Cardinus, who spends his retirement weekends walking those halls with a veterans group that finds lost medals and takes them home to families, stopped at that table, the way he stops at every table, and asked to see the group, the way he asks at every case. He turned the star over. He read the back. And 18 years fell off him, because in 2007, Cardinus had been a captain with a route security company in Baghdad, and he had written, at a plywood desk, in a tent that smelled like diesel, the citation that went with that exact piece of brass, and he had read it out loud in front of a formation while a sergeant named June Prather stood at attention and looked straight through him, and men like Cardinus do not forget the names they have read out loud. He did not buy it. He did not make a scene. He asked the dealer, politely, for the provenance. Dealers keep provenance. And the dealer, who is not a villain in this story either, showed him the receipt trail without argument. And then General Cardinus walked out to the parking lot and did the 2 most procedural things a man can do, in the correct order. He called the county sheriff's department back home, my county, and filed a report of property believed stolen or converted, itemized with the citation language attached as identification. And then he called me. You already know the beginning of the call. Now I will give you the rest of it. After he told me to sit down, and I did not, he said, June, I am standing in a convention hall in Ohio, and 10 minutes ago I had your Bronze Star in my hand. I read the back of it. I need you to go, right now, tonight, and physically verify your footlocker, and then I need you to tell me the truth. Is there any way on God's earth that group is supposed to be here? And I looked out my kitchen window at the dark, at the direction my father's house sits in, 7 miles away, and the 2 women who live in me stood up at the same time. And for the first time in 10 weeks, it was the technician who got to the phone first. I heard myself say, "Negative, sir. It is not supposed to be there." And I heard him breathe out, slow the way he breathed before he told us hard things in Baghdad, and he said, "Then somebody sold it, Sergeant. The trail runs through a yard sale on a road called Miller. I am sorry. I believe you know the address. I drove to my father's house that night. He was asleep. I did not knock. I have a key, and I used it the way I have entered evidence rooms my whole life, quietly with gloves on, metaphorically speaking. And I went to the garage and I did what I should have done in September. Full inventory. Item by item, down to the steel bottom of that footlocker, under the flashlight of my phone, kneeling on a swept concrete floor at 11 at night. The uniforms were there. The boots were there. The flag certificate was there. The presentation case was not there, but I already knew that. What I did not know, what I had not let myself check for 10 weeks, was the last thing, the top layer, the exhibit that argued for him. The letter. 1 page of legal pad. Be safe, work with your gloves on. Sleeved in acid-free plastic. Laid flat on the metals where I had filed it 7 years ago, so the two halves of my father could keep each other company. Gone. Sold. $5 the lot. My father had sold the box with himself inside it, and he did not know either thing he had done. The report General Cardinus filed from a parking lot in Ohio took 2 days to work its way through the system, and when it landed on the intake desk of the sheriff's office of my county, which is to say, it landed 40 feet from where I keep other people's evidence for a living. I found out when Detective Sergeant Tran stopped in my doorway on a Thursday morning, holding a thin folder the way people hold folders they wish belonged to someone else, and said, "June, I need you to hear this from me and not from the hallway. Your name is in a property conversion case. You're the property owner." And I stood up at my own counter, in my own room, among 4,000 tagged and numbered things whose every movement I could account for, and I did the only thing my whole career has trained into me. I said then, as of this minute I am a civilian in this building. And I meant it mechanically. There is a drawer in my desk with keys to the annex where casework overflow gets stored. I took the ring out, signed it over to my deputy tech in the log, in my own handwriting, time-stamped, and Tran watched me do it and did not tell me it was unnecessary, because he is good at his job and it was not unnecessary. Recusal is not a feeling. It is paperwork. If this story was going to run through my building, it was going to run through it cleaner than any case we ever kept, because I already knew, standing there with the folder still shut, whose kitchen it was going to end up in. There was only one address at the bottom of that receipt trail. I had grown up in it. What happened at that kitchen table on Monday afternoon, I was not there for, by law and by choice. I know it the way you will now know it, from my father's own mouth, because at 9 o'clock that night he called me, and for the first time in his 76 years he narrated an hour of his life to me start to finish without being asked, in a voice I had never heard him use. And I have come to understand that confession was the only chair left in that kitchen, and he sat in it. So this is his account, checked later against Tran's report, and the two match, which does not surprise me. My father has never misstated an inventory in his life. Tran came alone. No lights. No drama, a detective in a rain jacket with a folder and a clipboard. And my father received him the way he receives all officials. Coffee offered. Table wiped. Ready to be helpful. Certain, in the way of men who have never been in trouble, that trouble was a thing that happened to other kinds of people. Tran laid out the first item the way detectives do. Flat, no tone. A photograph. Close-up, high resolution. The back of a bronze star. And centered in the frame. Cut into the brass by an arsenal machine before either of them had gray hair. An initial and a family name. J. Prather. And Tran asked the first question. "Sir, do you recognize this name?" And my father, helpful, said, "Well, sure. That's my name. Prather." And then he looked closer, at the first initial, and my father told me that this was the moment the kitchen started to change size on him, because there is only one J. Prather in our family, and he had never in his life stood close enough to that metal to know it carried her. The second thing Tran laid on the table was 2 sheets of paper, and he said, "Sir, this is how the item was identified, and I'm required to confirm the identification with you." And he read it out loud. Not all of it. Tran is a quiet man. He read what the confirmation required. But the confirmation required the substance, and so at his own kitchen table, from the mouth of a detective he had poured coffee for, at the age of 76, my father heard, for the first time, in the government's own flat grammar, What happened on the 14th of April, 2007, on a road south of Baghdad? Vehicle struck and disabled by enemy fire. Sergeant Prather dismounted under sustained small arms fire. Moved to the burning vehicle. Extracted the driver. Returned. Extracted the gunner. Administered aid until relieved. Actions credited with saving the lives of 2 soldiers. With valor. My father told me that Tran's voice did not change the whole way through, and that this was the worst part. That a stranger could hold those sentences level. In the same kitchen where the word soldier had only ever been said with a little laugh attached. At a table where the woman in those sentences had been asked, over ham if the costume came with dental. He said the refrigerator compressor shut off somewhere in the middle of it, and the room went so quiet he could hear the clipboard when Tran set it down. He said, June. I looked at the window because I could not look at the paper. He said, I did not know. And on the phone, 9 hours later, I said nothing, because that sentence was not mine to help him carry, and we both knew the reason he did not know, and it had a date on it, and the date was every day for 25 years. Then came the third thing, the only thing Tran had actually driven out there to ask, the question the entire file reduced to, and he asked it the way procedure asks, without cruelty, which is its own kind of severity. Sir, the item was sold from this address on the 16th of August. Were you authorized by the owner to sell it? And my father, Gordon Prather, tool and die man, floor supervisor, keeper of straight lines and fair prices, a man who has never once cheated a customer or misread a spec sheet, sat at his kitchen table across from a detective, with the citation between them and his daughter's name face up in a photograph, and gave the only true answer there was. And the true answer was not no. The true answer was worse than no, and he gave it in full, and by his own account his voice barely made it across the table. He said, I priced it at $5. Tran did not write anything for a moment, my father said. He just let the sentence sit on the table with everything else, and the silence in that kitchen was the kind, and this is my phrase, not my father's. My father does not have phrases for this, the kind of silence that writes itself into the report. Then Tran gathered the photographs and said the case disposition would depend largely on the owner, and thanked him for the coffee he had not touched, and left, and my father sat at that table alone. He told me, until it got dark around him, without turning on the light, doing the one kind of arithmetic Landis fabrication never taught him. He called me at 9. I saw his name on the screen and stood at my kitchen window and let it ring twice, because I needed both women present, the daughter and the technician. And then I answered. And here is the entire conversation, and I am giving it to you complete, every word. Because it is the shortest honest conversation my family has ever had, and I have come to believe it is the best one. He said, June. It was yours. Not a question, but I answered it. It was mine, Dad. Quiet. Then the detective read me a piece of paper. I know the piece of paper, I said. Longer quiet. I could hear his kitchen clock, the one that has hung over the stove since Reagan. And then my father, 76 years old, said the last thing either of us said that night. He said, the letter I sent you. To the desert. Was that in the box too? And I looked out my window in the dark toward a house 7 miles away, where a man was sitting under a clock with the lights off. And I said, yes, sir. It was on top. And neither of us could afford the next sentence, so neither of us bought it. And we sat on that open line, breathing, for longer than I will admit, and for once in our lives, nobody hung up first. The line just stayed open with both of us on it, which, if you have been listening to this story at all, you know is the closest thing my family has ever had to an embrace. He came to my apartment 2 evenings later, which I need you to understand has never once happened. My father does not come to me. Family gravity in the Prather house runs one direction, downhill toward his kitchen, and yet there he was on my landing above the dry cleaner at 6 in the evening, in his good jacket, holding his cap in both hands like a man at a counter waiting to be helped. I let him in. He looked at my 600 square feet the way he looks at everything, taking its measure, and for once in his life he kept the measurement to himself. But I need you to know he did not arrive finished, because that is not how it goes with men like my father, and I would be lying to make him arrive soft. He arrived defended. He sat at my little table and turned his cap over twice and led with the version he had been drafting alone under that kitchen clock for 2 days. "June, it was a box in my garage," he said. "Unmarked. Sitting on my shelf 4 years. How was I supposed to know what was in it?" And there it was. The wrong apology. The one that asks for something. The one that wanted me to sign off on the story where the box did this. I did not raise my voice. I have interviewed enough people across evidence counters to know that volume is as a gift you hand the defended. I said, "You're right about one thing, Dad. You didn't know what was in it." And then I said the sentence I had been carrying for 2 days. And I said it the way Tran reads citations. Level, because level is what makes it land. "But you knew whose it was. You didn't know what it was worth. Those are different crimes. Dad, and only one of them was ever against the law." He pushed back once. "Of course he did. He is a Landis man, and a Landis man defends his pricing. 34 years, he said. Everything that crossed my floor had a number. That is not a character flaw. That is how I fed you. And I priced that box like I price everything, by what I could see. And I let that sit, because it was true. And then I answered it with the only thing I had that outranked it. Then we are the same, I said, and that is the problem. Because I did the identical thing, Dad. I took the proof of my whole life and I filed it under miscellaneous myself. No tag, no inventory, no label in another man's building, for 4 years. You priced what you could see. And I made sure what mattered could not be seen. You wrote $5 on my life, but I am the one who left the line blank." He stopped turning the cap. "My father has spent 50 years being argued at, and I had just declined the argument and handed him a shared charge sheet instead, and he did not have a procedure for that. Nobody had ever gone stand next to Gordon Prather inside his own mistake before. It is very hard, I have learned, to stay defended against someone who refuses to stand on the other side of the room. I will tell you how I hold my father now, and it is a habit from the evidence room. Every item that comes across my counter gets a tag, and the tag lists what the thing is, not what it meant. And I have learned the hard way that the tag is not the item. So I keep 2 tags on my father, and both are accurate, and neither is complete. The first tag lists what he did. Sold his daughter's valor for $5 without asking, after 25 years of pricing her life in public, one little phase at a time. The second tag lists what he carried. A trade that died underneath him while his daughter was at war. A plant that took 34 years and returned a box and a handshake. One letter, written in the worst week of his life, that said nothing about himself and everything, and a language of numbers that was the only inheritance anyone ever left him. Both tags are true. The tag is not the item. I re-tag my father most weeks, and I expect to until one of us is out of inventory. What I did not do was prosecute him, and what I also did not do was absolve him, because those were both exits. And I had decided he was taking the road instead. Tran had told me the disposition sat with me. Sign one line and it is theft by conversion. Sign another and it is a family matter, closed. I signed the second line. And then I drove to my father's house with a map printed off my work computer, and I put it on his kitchen table, under the clock, and I smoothed it flat with both hands. His gesture returned to sender, and I said, "The case is closed, Dad." Here is what is not. There is a folding table in Ohio, at a collector's hall, with a box on it that has your handwriting on the price sticker and my name on the brass. 5.5 hours each way. You are going to drive there, and you are going to stand at that table, and you are going to bring my life home yourself. He looked at the map a long time. Then he said the only thing that could have made me believe we would survive this. 4 words. No defense left on them at all. He said, "What do I owe?" He left on a Friday before dawn, alone in the truck, with the map I printed folded on the bench seat, and he would not let me come. And I did not argue, because some evidence has to be recovered by the man who lost it, or the recovery does not count. What happened at that folding table in Ohio I hold from 3 sources, like any exhibit worth keeping, and the 3 accounts agree, and I will give them to you in the order they reached me. My father's account was 11 words, delivered at my door that Sunday with the case under his arm like a toolbox. He said the man was fair. The general talks a lot. Here. That is a complete report, by Prather standards, and I have learned to read the compression. The dealer's account came Tuesday, by phone because he called me himself, and I learned that the man who had priced my medals at $450 was the son of a Vietnam door gunner, and that when a 76-year-old stranger stood at his table and said, in front of other customers, "I sold this at a yard sale. It belongs to my daughter. I have come to buy my mistake back." The dealer took the group out of the case, slid the receipt across, and charged him exactly $5. And then the dealer told me he did something he was not sure was kind, and I told him it was the kindest thing in this entire story. He peeled my father's own price sticker out of his files, where he keeps provenance, and he pressed it back onto the corner of the case, and he said, "Some prices you keep, sir. So you remember the exchange rate you almost lived by." And General Cardinus, who had driven down to meet him at that table because that is who that man is, gave me the third account, the only one with a middle in it. He said my father stood straight through all of it. The receipt, the sticker, the handshake. And then Cardinus did what I had asked him in one short phone call to do, the thing the citation cannot. He told my father the flesh and blood of the 14th of April, standing in a convention hall between a helmet rack and a bin of patches, 4 sentences, and he gave me the 4 sentences later so I would have them on the record. The vehicle burned faster than the paperwork says. She went back twice. The citation says once. Paperwork undercounts. And my father took that standing too. What he did not take standing was the last thing in the case. Because when he lifted the medals to look, the way you finally look at a thing you are holding a receipt for, he found the sleeve underneath, acid-free plastic, 1 page of yellow legal pad, his own block handwriting pressed hard enough to read from the back. "Be safe. Work with your gloves on." Cardinus told me my father sat down on a folding chair in the middle of a militaria show, with strangers browsing around him, and held that page in both hands for a long time. And Cardinus stood beside him and looked at patches he did not need to look at, because some inventory a man has to count alone. The shadow box appeared 6 weeks later, at Christmas, and my father built it himself, and I need the trade to tell you what that means. Tool and die is exactness or it is nothing. He joined the corners blind, no visible fasteners. He cut the glass himself. He mounted the medals on navy felt, the ribbon squared to a tolerance no framing shop would bother with, the letters sleeved and centered beneath them. And at the bottom, a small brass plate he had engraved by hand at the workbench where he has engraved part numbers my whole life. April 14th, 2007. Case by G. Prather. The army cut my name into that brass to protect it. My father cut his own into a different brass to answer it. And in the lower corner, under the glass, where I had not put it and would never have put it, was the yard sale sticker. $5. His handwriting. I reached to ask, and he stopped me with one hand, and gave me the only sentence he said all evening that shook. "Leave it where I can see it." His correct apology came in January, and it was not the word sorry, because that word asks for something back and he had stopped asking. He came for coffee, and at the door, leaving cap in his hands, he said, "I read that citation every night for a week." And then he said the truest thing any Prather has ever said to another. "I had the dates wrong about you my whole life." That was all. It was enough. It was exact, and exact is his native language, and for once it was measuring me generously. He drives now. The veterans group General Cardinus walks those halls with, the ones who find named medals and take them home. Needed drivers, and my father needed a road. 1,100 miles last year, a 76-year-old man in a pickup, carrying other families' brass through 3 states, standing on porches while strangers cry, saying almost nothing, holding the box level. The man who sold a medal now delivers them. I do not call it redemption, because I run an evidence room and I am careful with labels. I call it restitution, paid monthly, at his own rate. What we have never done, he and I is speak of the 14th of April directly, me telling it, him asking. The citation stands between us like a bridge 2 people can share without walking to the middle, and we both stand on it, and we do not look down. Maybe someday. The file stays open. Some things do not close and are not supposed to, and an honest custodian learns to shelve them where the light is decent, and check on them, and leave them unresolved on purpose. Last August, the Miller Road sale came back around, and my father took his corner like always. Legal pad, straight lines, fair prices. But in the middle of his table, on a stand he machined himself, facing the road where 1.5 miles of the county walks by, sat the shadow box, and taped to its base, a square of cardboard in block handwriting. Not for sale. Ask me why. And people asked. All day in the August heat, my father stood at a folding table and told strangers, over and over, in his flat exact voice, what his daughter did on a road south of Baghdad, and what he did at a yard sale, both the metal and the sticker, the whole inventory, item and price. I sat in a lawn chair off to the side and drank lemonade and listened to my father read my citation out loud from memory, 7 times. And I want to tell you what that is, in the language he taught me. That is a man who found out what he was holding, and adjusted the price, publicly at his own table, in front of his own county. Pride needs witnesses, they say, and dignity survives privately. My father found the third thing, a dignity that testifies. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. Here is what a $5 sticker taught me, and what it cost every person in this story to learn it. Price and worth wear the same word in our family, and they are not the same thing. And the people who only speak one of those languages will file your life under miscellaneous, not from hate, but from fluency, because they price what they can see. And you, if you are like me, will help them do it, by keeping what matters where nobody can read it. So label your life. Say what the box is. Read your own citation out loud to the people at your table, before a stranger with a clipboard has to do it in your absence. So let me ask you what that legal pad asked me. What is the most valuable thing you own? And whose building is it sitting in? And do they know what they are holding? And is there someone in your life you have priced for years without ever once reading their citation? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, evenings mostly, the way I read manifests, all the way to the bottom line. If this story held you, the like button tells me so, and subscribing means the next one finds you. New stories premiere every week. Take care of yourself, and check your chain of custody on the things that matter. I will see you in the next one.